Hello everybody and welcome to the latest in my incredibly infrequent PS4 Hidden Gems series of videos. This time around I've picked out a title called Lock's Quest to look at. Lock's Quest was originally released on the DS way back when and got a HD remaster of sorts released on PS4 a couple of years ago. It landed without making much of a splash, it must be said. This franchise is probably dead. It was picked up by THQ Nordic to release on PS4, and we haven't heard anything about a new one since. So I think it is safe to say that this will be the only Lock's Quest we get to play. And the reason I picked it out is because I was reminded of the tower defense genre thanks to Ace Team's Soul Seraph, which was released about 2 weeks ago by Atlas, and it reminded me that we don't get to see too many tower defense games anymore. There was a point in time where it was basically the be-all and end-all of the mobile space, and everybody was competing to create tower defense titles. And then there were a lot of developers that were looking for ways to bring the tower defense genre to console and PC and whatever as well. There was a time where it was very common to have a new tower defense release basically every week. And while the genre still kind of sticks around, and we do see some pretty good efforts done to this day, for example, Pixel Junk Monsters springs to mind immediately as a really good one that has recently been released, and Soul Seraph itself is very good as well. We don't see too many of them though anymore. We don't see too many attempts at it. It's a genre that's kind of, it's there, but it hasn't got the prominence that it once did. So yeah, I pulled out Lock's Quest as a tower defense title that I have particular fondness for, and figured I might as well highlight it this week via this video. Lock's Quest is a very traditional tower defense game in a lot of ways. You spend a couple of minutes building up new towers around a particular point that you need to defend, and then the enemies will attack in a wave and you need to hold them off before the next round starts, where you'll have some new resources and you use those resources to build more towers because the enemies get a little bit more powerful and the waves get a little bit tougher. And you keep doing that for as many waves as it takes to defeat the enemies and move on to the next part of the story. Or if you're playing the endless mode, obviously you keep going until finally you get overwhelmed because there's nothing you can do to stop the enemies anymore. It's quite a simple formula, it must be said, but when it's done well, as I do believe Lock's Quest is, when it is done well, it's a very engaging kind of game because it has that light strategy element, because you need to know where to build the towers, and there is an awful lot of room to be creative in terms of how you do that and approach the tower building side of things with various strategies, and try different things to see if you can improve your score or do a bit better the next time around. So there's a lot of scope for getting good at a tower defense game, but at the same time it's very accessible. It's a very accessible approach to strategy games, where a lot of other strategy games, be that turn-based or real-time, have a lot of complexity in them, which kind of stops people from getting into them or really enjoying them as much as they might like. Tower defense games are always immediately accessible. You know immediately what you need to do, and it is always very easy to follow along. So you can be up and playing and having a good time with it in a very short period of time. And that's always been the strength of the genre, and a good example of a tower defense game is a game that is very accessible. And again, Lock's Quest is very accessible right from the start. You know exactly what you need to do. There's only a couple of towers that you have to start with to build with, but as you move on you get more towers to play with, and you get a little bit more range and variety, and the uses of those towers becomes more complex. So for example, at the start, the only tower you really got access to is a shooting tower. It just does straight damage to the enemies. But as you go on, you start to get towers that have different effects, like they might slow the enemy down, they might poison the enemy, and all of that kind of stuff. And then you need to use that combination of towers to take down particularly difficult enemies, because the enemy variety also gets it grows. There are enemies that have particular strengths and weaknesses against different kinds of towers. So it's definitely a strategy game. It definitely requires that you approach it with a strategic mind, but at the same time it's very accessible. And I think for people who haven't really played too many tower defense games, Lock's Quest is actually a good place to start on that basis. Now, one of the things that puts some people off playing tower defense games is how passive they can be when the enemies start to attack. With most tower defense games, once the enemy wave starts, you haven't got too much to do other than sit there and wait for the enemies to come on. But developers have realised that passivity is a bit of a turn-off for a lot of players. and they've looked for ways to make sure that the players are still active in the game. In Locke's defense's case, what you can do is you can actually control Locke himself, and then he can actually be part of the resistance. He can actually try and fight the enemies as well, and he does that by actually physically attacking them. So this is it's a pretty clever little thing to do. It's not too complex. It's not like it's an RPG where you need to level up your character in that kind of complex way. But what you can do is you can use Locke to shore up areas where there's a weakness in the defense. So if the enemies are making too much progress against towers, you can have him go and help out at that point in the battlefield. But of course, in doing that, he's not focused on other parts of the battlefield. So you still need to be strategic in how you use him, which is, again, good, and you need to be on your toes throughout the entire wave of enemies. But you do have that opportunity to use him as part of the active defense as well. Locke is also able to repair the buildings in the middle of a fight, so if you do get a moment where there's a bit of downtime, rather than watch your buildings slowly get demolished, you can duck in and you can actually repair them as well, which is a pretty important thing to do, because if a building gets destroyed, it costs a lot of money or a lot of resources to repair it. Whereas with if you were able to repair it in the middle of a battle, you actually conserve a lot of resources and you still have that tower and it's in full working shape. So there's quite a few things you need to do while the battle's going on. You need to rush around all over the place to shore up the defenses and fight particular enemies to make sure that they don't destroy your towers. You need to repair the towers, and you need to make sure that you're collecting enough resources so that you can then build new towers in the next wave. So it's very busy, but not overwhelmingly so, and even if you do fail, you don't have to go back too far to retry the bit that you got stuck at. So again, it straddles that line between accessibility and features that is the hallmark of a really good tower defense game. On top of all of that, it has a kind of story mode, an RPG-like story mode. A lot of tower defense games don't go heavy on the story, but this one seems to be a little bit inspired by the likes of Final Fantasy Tactics in the way that it presents itself. I mean, you can see it from the visuals. Obviously, they're very Final Fantasy Tactics-like in design, but at the same time, it also has a story that it feels very inspired by Final Fantasy Tactics and that kind of approach to storytelling. It's nothing too complex. Again, it's about accessibility rather than complexity, but it's an enjoyable little story, and it's quite charmingly told thanks to the quality of the visuals and the light-hearted nature of it all. It's got a great soundtrack, a really good soundtrack, which really helps you kind of get into the spirit of things as well. And the story doesn't overwhelm the rest of the game either, because I know a lot of people are a little bit turned off by RPGs and the like because the story tends to become such a prominent part of it and they just want to get on with the game. With this one, you need to go through a couple of waves of enemies before you get a story sequence, and the story sequences are never too long or too dense, so it's not like it becomes too stressful of a thing if you just want to kick back and play some game. So on balance, I think the story actually does good work for Locke's Quest, and I think it's another kind of win. I don't think there's too much wrong with this game. I think on the PlayStation 4, it doesn't control as well as it did on the DS. On the DS, it was obviously optimized for touchscreens, and that kind of helps when you're manipulating little buildings around the place. But this game is very playable on the PS4 anyway, and I think it's quite easygoing, enjoyable game, and it's a bit. I would have liked to have seen it done better on PS4. I would have liked to have seen this franchise grow because I think it had plenty of potential. Unfortunately, for commercial reasons, I guess, it never quite got off the ground. So yeah, basically, if you're looking for an easygoing, light-hearted strategy game, or you're interested in having an introduction to the tower defense genre, maybe you haven't played too many examples of it in the past, and you want to see what they're all about, then give Locke's Quest a go for sure. I think you'll find it quite easy to get into and quite enjoyable once you do. And yeah, it might just turn you on to the rest of the tower defense genre as a whole. So yeah, thanks very much for watching this video. If you are a fan of Locke's Quest or have played these games in the past, do let me know if this has reminded you of that game. Do drop me a note and tell me what you think of it, and whether you would like to see another one, I guess. Otherwise, this is pretty much it for the video. You're about to see me beat off one of the bosses, the first boss. They tend to be a little bit difficult, these boss fights, but very rewarding, and we will see you at the next video. Please do consider backing me on Patreon if you enjoy my videos. That really helps. And as you would have seen on the site, you actually get visual novels now as part of being a Patreon backer, so there's a value add in there for you too. But yeah, thanks as always for watching the videos, and we will see you at the next one.